playing run.
Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to worship. I have a number of announcements. You may notice in your bulletin that we've made a couple of changes, as we do sometimes in worship. We're changing our confession, using a different one. We'll be using the contemporary version of the Lord's Prayer from now until Advent, and using a different Eucharistic prayer. Just want to make you aware of that as we change these things, sometimes seasonally and sometimes just midway through a long season, such as the one we're in now, which is Pentecost. Today is Rally Day, and following the children's sermon, the children and the teachers of the children will go to the back and bring our flower cross forward, and after that we'll have a blessing of our teachers as we begin our Sunday school year this year as well. The adult class began this morning. We're talking about civic life and faith and how important it is for Christians to be able to talk to one another and possibly even disagree with one another about some of the important things which are happening in our world. So if you didn't get a chance to join us for the first session today, we're doing that again Wednesday night at 6. And then session 2 will be 2 weeks from today, as I am going on vacation, leaving on Thursday and coming back on the 17th. So I will not be here next week. Pastor Greg Olson, who is the chaplain at Jenna Cross Lutheran Village at Wolf Creek, will be here next week. He was last with us when we were in New Orleans for the youth gathering. He will be here for both services next Sunday. So.
Welcome everyone to Rally Day 2024. It's great to see everyone here. It's going to be nice to start our Sunday school again and start our many activities that we have going on this year. We invite everyone to come back to Fellowship Hall. We have beautiful cake there to be munching on, so please join us to celebrate Rally Day. And next week, doing our fellowship, I'd like to thank the contemporary team will be doing it September 15th.
Good morning. A little gentle reminder that next Saturday, 8:30 to 9:30 a.m. is the second Saturday Wild Church at Wildwood Park, second parking lot. We have it's lay-led, I lay-lead it. We have a quick meditation, we do a walk, and then have a closing meditation. So kids are welcome. It's kid-friendly. Please feel free to join us. Thank you.
Also today is the beginning of a year-long celebration leading up to Grace's 125th anniversary. So on September 7th, 2025, we will be celebrating that Sunday with a special service. Our bishop will be present, celebrating 125 years of ministry of Grace, which is a wonderful thing. And so we thought that each month leading up to that time, we want to highlight some different pieces of history of our congregation, of the world, of our community. And so this is the first Sunday for that 364 days ahead of that big celebration. We'll be doing that every second Sunday of the month for the next year. And to kick that off for us today, John Wegner, who is on the anniversary committee, is going to offer us a little snapshot of what was going on in the world at a particular piece of Grace's history.
Okay, well, thank you. Despite the fact that I've actually been a member here literally all my life, and my parents were members of Grace all their lives, this happens to be the first time that I've actually addressed the congregation. So, in commemoration of our 125th anniversary, I'm giving the first so-called temple talk to kind of acquaint you with the history, or at least a few of the highlights of the history of our congregation, and to a larger extent what life was like when this congregation was just getting started. So I'm dealing with the first of the decades of the history of Grace, and these temple talks will deal with the history of Grace and the history of the larger community on a decade-by-decade basis. And so I've got the task now to acquaint you with what things were like from 1900 through 1909. So a little bit here and there. It's just a kind of a potpourri of what things were like in general and a little bit more specifically about the foundations of Grace Lutheran Church. In 1900, the United States had a population of about 76 million, and that's about only 1/4 of what it is today. But it was a time of explosive growth, and during the previous 10 years, the population of this country had increased by 21%. There were 45 states in the United States. Now, of course, we have 50. In 1900, the average American could expect to live to be 45 years old, and the average income of an American worker in 1900 was $450. That's $450 per year. Educational levels were a lot lower than what they are now. Only about 2% of the American people attended college, let alone graduated. And only about 11% of people who were ages 11 through 17, or excuse me, 14 through 17, attended high school in any capacity whatsoever. Between 1900 and 1909, there were a lot of things that were invented or born, if you will, including, among other things, tea bags, electric vacuum cleaners, teddy bears, and banana splits. Aside from the trivia of all of this, Toledo more particularly was a bustling and growing city and the home to many phases of emerging industry. Population of Toledo in 1900 was about 140,000, making it the 26th largest city in the United States. It was larger than a place out in California called Los Angeles. And it was much, much larger than an incredibly small place in Nevada called Las Vegas. Among the other industries that were growing in Toledo at that time, there was bicycle manufacturing. A few years before 1900, Toledo had been called the Coventry of America, largely because it was seen in the shadow of the English city of Coventry, which was the leading manufacturer of bicycles in Great Britain. Toledo's first car, call it automobile if you want, was a product in 1900 of a company called the Lozier Bicycle Works. The company was primarily in the business of manufacturing, guess what, bicycles. But in 1900, several of the workers there decided they were bored manufacturing bicycles, and they decided to take their hand in attempting to manufacture an automobile, which they did. Toledo's first car was not powered by gasoline, it was powered by steam, and it seated a grand total of 2 people. Also in 1900, the Toledo Zoo got started as an adjunct of Walbridge Park in the South End. It began with a collection of one animal that the public told was a bear. It wasn't. It was actually a rather large-sized woodchuck. Now, among other things, the people of Toledo were represented to a large extent by immigrants. This was a time of vast immigration, which is going to peak in the year 1907. In 1900, the year our congregation got started, almost 10% of Toledo's population was born in foreign countries. Among them were the Germans. They were the largest single foreign-born group in Toledo, as well as in the United States at that time. Now, while many of them were Catholic, some of them, a few, had no religious affiliation. A great many actually were Lutheran, deriving, of course, from the heritage of the Reformation and the leadership of Martin Luther. Now, at that time in Toledo, as well as across the country, a lot of Lutheran churches held their services in the German language, but an increasing number were holding services in the English language. Now, in Toledo, one of the most prominent so-called English Lutheran churches was St. Matthew's Lutheran Church. They were to become the parent church of Grace Lutheran Church. Among other things, the Reverend Hiram Peters at St. Matthew's Lutheran Church in 1900 recognized, as did many people, was the expansive growth in a neighborhood in Toledo called the Door West End, which is exactly what I would say it was. It was the western fringe of the city at that time, Outdoor Street, which incidentally, Dor is spelled D-O-R-R, and it was named after the man who was the mayor of Toledo at the time of the Civil War back in the 1860s. So Reverend Peters, is the pastor of St. Matthew's, saw a desire or a need, especially in an outreach of Christian education in the Dor West End, to create a Sunday school, a Lutheran Sunday school in that area. The first really significant date we have in the history of our congregation comes in February 1900, specifically February 25th, 1900, when approximately 70 students met in 7 subdivided classes with Reverend Peters of St. Matthew's in charge in a place called Olympic Hall. That's a rather grandiose name, actually, for what was a relatively small-sized, second-story, otherwise empty auditorium above Parnell's drugstore at the corner of Dor and Boyd Streets in the heart of the Dor West End. So, the Sunday school at Grace actually preceded the creation of Grace Lutheran Church. During the summer of 1900, a Chicago Lutheran Seminary student whose name was H.T. Weber, and looked I haven't been able to figure out what the initials actually stood from, and I even contacted the Chicago Lutheran Seminary of today, and they said, sorry, we can't find it. Nonetheless, he was an intern at St. Matthew's, and he spent the summer of 1900 going around the neighborhoods of the Dor West End and canvassing the people to see if they would be interested in forming a permanent Lutheran congregation. The next significant date we have concerning Grace comes on July 15, 1900. That was the date when Grace, or what was to become Grace, held its first worship service at Olympic Hall above Parnell's drugstore. When the service was over, 26 people met there and decided, yes, we do want to form a church. A couple months went by, or about 3 months went by, and on a very important date, which was that of September 7th, 1900, 15 people met at the home of a man named E.C. Stone, who I believe lived on what was then called Missouri Street, and these 15 people agreed to start a congregation which they gave the tentative name Grace Lutheran Church. The following month, on October 19th, the members, or quasi-members, if you will, of the new congregation adopted a constitution which affiliated them officially with the Evangelical Lutheran Synod of Ohio. They needed a minister. Reverend Peters out of St. Matthew's couldn't wear 2 hats at the same time. It was just too big of a job. So on December 2nd, 1900, the fledgling congregation issued a call to a man named Gustavus Schmobra. Now he's later on going to anglicize his first name from Gustavus to George. Call him Gustavus or call him George. On December 2nd, 1900, he was installed as the first pastor of the new Grace Lutheran Church. On May 20th, 1901, the new congregation received its official incorporation papers from the state of Ohio, well signed by Ohio Secretary of State at the time, Lewis Leyland, who believed me now is in the political netherworld, but nonetheless, I encountered this man many years ago when he happened to turn up in my researches for my doctoral dissertation in history. So they got their incorporation papers, which were duly signed by the people who were charter members at the time. If you haven't seen it, stop in room number 3, and it is framed under glass hanging next to the whiteboard. So, they have a pastor, they have a name, they have their incorporation papers, and on April 6, 1902, they decided, after deciding the obvious, they now need an actual church and not simply a hall above the drugstore. They laid a cornerstone for a Gothic-style church on the corner of Fender and Missouri Streets. I will tell you, go over and have a look at it. Sadly, the building long since has gone into repair, and now it no longer stands. They had purchased the lot there, the real property, for $950, and as for the church edifice itself, they had it budgeted at $2,058. But the price went up. The building, which was originally budgeted at $2,058, ultimately cost $2,211.94. Now, the reason for that is because they wanted a slightly larger building. So they raised the ceiling, and they also included, and this is the primary thing that increased the cost, electricity. That was still a relatively new innovation at the time. June 22nd, 1902, and it surprises me, but apparently it literally took them only about 4 months to make the necessary completions to this first structure in order to occupy it. But on June 22nd, 1902, there was an initial service at Olympic Hall, and then the entire congregation marched over it was only a few blocks, but marched over to the new